Thank you very much. Very, very, very excited to be here. 大家好，我非常高兴，今天我在这里可以跟你们做分享。我希望我可以能用中文做今天的分享，可是我的普通话不那么好的，所以。在2006年，我在北京住了1年。那个时间我学中国法律，之后我去香港，在香港他们都说广东话，我不明白广东话，所以没有机会练习。所以今天我用英文，可是下次我回来，我希望。我可以用中文做分享，所以真的对不起了。So very, very excited. My name is Henry Arslan, and sorry, I'll do the presentation in English. My passion and my focus is the future of the banking and legal industries. And I'm very lucky doing this at PwC, where I head our fintech and regtech practice here in Hong Kong and China. What I want to share with you all today is some of the latest global developments we are seeing in the regtech space. Most importantly, how they relate to blockchain and what are some of the trends we are seeing, especially outside of China. And my goal is very, very simple. Is to hopefully give you some of this color and information that we are seeing overseas to empower you with this knowledge that you can go there and take the important decisions you want to do for your business or come up with new products that you want to build. You know, whenever I give these talks around the world, the first impression everybody tells me is that, you know, this is what people think of regulations. This is what comes up when people talk about compliance. Nobody's really happy. But I have to say that I completely disagree. And I really believe that this is the most exciting time if you are looking at regulations and compliance. I'm a lawyer by background, I'm a nerd, but I can tell you some of the biggest opportunities we are seeing right now are actually coming in around the regulatory space. And I'll give you guys some examples today. It's obviously because of regtech. And what's really interesting, if we look at the trend would actually change. This is the Google Trends graph. We saw what happened with fintech. And what really I focus on is this little yellow line that is just coming up, which is regtech. Regtech, and the only warning I will give you beforehand, and I say this to all my keynotes, if anybody tells you they are a regtech expert, you have to run away. I can tell you, really, I spend my time in this and I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen in 6 months. The industry is moving so quickly that even us that are in it day in, day out, can tell you honestly, we cannot even anticipate what's happening. And really, let's move forward to it on it. So on regtech, right? It's basically the use of new technologies to really solve regulatory and compliance requirements. Not only more effectively, but also more efficient. And what's really interesting is what is driving this. The most basic reason is cost and headcount. We talked about it this morning. Only one US regulation in the US, for example, called Dodd-Frank, cost financial institutions more than $36 billion US in the last 6 years. A bank like Citibank, one of the largest global banks, has more than 36,000 risk and compliance officers. To put that in perspective, that's more compliance and risk officers than Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn have total staff. And what's really interesting, a part of this, is also the complexity and legacy. Lawyers, we love complexity. But actually, when you look at it, only a rule like Dodd-Frank has a couple of thousand of pages of regulations. And financial institutions, to deal with it, obviously had a big spaghetti where new systems were adding on old systems just to be able to comply with these requirements. But what's really interesting with regtech is that the industry is completely fragmented. If we look in the fintech space, We all can name some of the big players around the world. We look at the in the blockchain space, we can name some of the big players around the world. But when it comes to RegTech, it's actually very difficult to name some of the big players. The industry is very, very fragmented, and it's actually currently going through a wave of a lot of M&A, where actually players are acquiring each other. The other one is that they are very geographically concentrated. For example, if we look outside of China, when you look at fintech and B2C fintech, there's China, there's California, there's other places in the world that are very, very strong. But when you look at RegTech, it's really concentrated on two areas. One is the US East Coast, and one is the Western Europe. And what's really interesting, I can tell you, when we work with banks, the biggest demand right now globally for RegTech solutions is coming from Asia. And this is why we're seeing over the last couple of months, a lot of players from the US, Europe, come to places like Hong Kong or Singapore and the region to try to sell their solutions. It's a very interesting arbitrage that has happened that we haven't seen in a long time in the broader fintech community. But also what's really interesting in RegTech, it's one of the few areas where financial institutions are happy to work together. In the fintech space, a bank wants to have it before the other bank. There's an element of competition. However, if you look at today compliance and regulations, they are not seen as a competitive advantage. They're seen as a cost center. And it's the only place where we're seeing actually banks come together and say, okay, how can we work together to collectively reduce some of our costs, whether it's compliance, whether it's KYC, or other elements. The other one, there are no licensing requirements. Whereas in the P2P space or in the B2C startups, there's a lot of consumer-facing applications where you need a regulatory license. When you look to RegTech, most of these solutions are pure technology plays. So actually one of the reasons I'm encouraging the growth of the industry is actually you don't need to go through the entire licensing process. The other one is that most 99.9% of RegTech startups in the world are all B2B. So there's really been an element of the banks we're trying to work more closely with the RegTech community as they are really seen as tools that can help them rather than compete with them. But there are difficulties. The sales cycles. Any one of you who has done B2B sales of products into financial institutions knows how long the sales cycles can be. I can tell you in the RegTech space, it's even longer. You're touching customer data, you're touching sensitive systems, and the cost of non-compliance can actually be very expensive for financial institutions. Another problem as well is while the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of departments at insurance companies like we saw before, or in broader financial institutions, got familiar with what's happening in fintech. Unfortunately, a lot of the compliance, regulatory, risk departments weren't as connected with what was the developments happening in the broader fintech world. And there's a whole education process now. We have to go inside financial institutions, especially when it comes to those divisions. The last point I will make is generally encouraged by regulators. Great example, the Hong Kong regulator, the SFC, changed their annual conference title from the FinTech and RegTech conference to the RegTech and FinTech conference. One of the few areas where actually regulators are happy to see financial institutions across the financial spectrum use these solutions. Think about it. Today, a lot of financial institutions, they do reporting on a monthly, generally on a quarterly basis to regulators. Then, generally the bank has a month to comply with and give the information. So imagine how much of a lag there is in the delay the data is being provided to regulators. And now actually with a lot of these RegTech solutions, especially the blockchain ones we'll talk about, this is a problem that we're able to solve. And really, so what are the use cases? When we talk to clients in financial services, for those of you who are looking to build solutions in the space, what are the use cases that we are seeing demand from financial institutions? Where there's budget, where they want to move forward, and they want to execute on. These are generally the ones. Onboarding. Actually, in China now, we're quite advanced when it comes to onboarding in certain areas of banking. But actually, if you look outside of China and in the West, the onboarding process for any financial institution is terrible. Those of you who have opened bank accounts, who had to deal with financial institutions know it. The process is very paper-driven, very manual, and actually extremely time-consuming. We're finally now able to come up with actually new solutions that are able to help these financial institutions reduce the time, reduce the people required, and most importantly, improve the customer experience. There's many solutions on blockchain-based. I have KYC Chain here from Hong Kong or Tradle. But there's also many solutions now the bank's experimenting with. They're actually not even blockchain-based to try to address this use case. The other one is anti-money laundering. One of the biggest problems today in the financial system. For any financial institution, any proceeds that come from criminal activity, drugs, or any other type of activity should not enter the banking system. Most financial institutions today, even, a lot of the work is still done manually. You open an account, somebody will do a Baidu or a Google search on you. Come up with a report that will be filed. This is one area we've made a lot of improvements over the last 2 years. We actually went from the bicycle to the Formula One car in about 24 months. Really where we have now solutions, a lot of them are actually blockchain-based, a lot of them are using actually a lot of artificial intelligence to solve the AML problem. And we failed, by the way, in this over the last couple of years. Today, it is estimated from the UN that 2 to 5% of the global GDP is actually laundered money. And we're only capturing 1 to 2% of funds that we should be able to capture. And finally, hopefully, we're looking forward to be able to change this over the coming years as we actually push towards the AML space with some new solutions in the market. The other big problem, which many actually have looked at and solving, internal conduct monitoring. This is something a lot of people who are outside financial services are not often aware. Your banker, when a banker talks to a client, all those conversations need to be recorded. Imagine it's a fund manager talking to a bank, all the conversations need to be recorded by law. The way these conversations are monitored, there's often, every bank will have an outsourced team in India, and a guy will come in the morning and listen to all the conversations these traders are having all day. First, it's not very efficient. Second, poor guy, what a terrible job. And finally now we are able to come up with solutions that are able to take the voice to text, be able to analyze the data, and actually plug that information to various other data points from inside financial institutions. From when the employee is entering the bank, to what emails he's sending, to what WeChat messages he's receiving, and to what websites he's visiting. And actually now a bank COO or a head of compliance can come in the morning and know which employee today are at risk because of their past behavior. There's another area where there's been really tremendous improvements over the last 6 months, and really where I'm extremely bullish of the changes we'll be seeing over the coming years. One of the biggest difficulties now in Asia, external communications. Think about today. All of us here, we're all talking using WeChat, or WhatsApp, or Line, or Kakao in Korea. Most financial institutions, again, the use of WeChat or WhatsApp is not allowed. Why? Because the banks are not able to archive the conversation. Now think about it. I mean, think about last time you spoke to your banker, you probably did it on WeChat. But legally, actually, it's not allowed. So what's happening now, the banks have a weird situation where technically on policies, the use of WeChat is actually not allowed, but everybody is using it. And finally now we're coming up with solutions in the market where you can start archiving the WeChat and WhatsApp conversations and actually be able to serve customers they want to talk to. Again, this is developments that happened really over the last 6 months, 1 year, and actually we're seeing a lot of developments coming in this space as well. Another one, very boring area, regulatory reporting. Nothing sexy in this. But I can tell you it's a very, very big cost item for any financial institution. Finally, once again, we have some solutions now that can take the regulatory information and be able to report it to regulators. Today, again, a lot of this happens on Excel spreadsheets that a team of humans are actually doing inside the financial institution. Forget the cost, the risk of mistakes that are happening with this being done manually today. And the last one I would say is the cost reduction, which a lot of these solutions now we're working on with blockchain are able to solve as well. So, Why are we able to do this right now? Obviously, there's a whole new set of tech tools that we're able to use, but obviously the one that excites me the most is obviously, and what we're here today is talking about blockchain. But what's been interesting though is whenever I speak to a lot of startups, a lot of the focus that we have is obviously on non-financial services use cases. And you're right, and to be honest, if you're looking at doing a POC, you're looking at doing a pilot, in many cases that is easier. However, I can tell you that the use cases we are seeing in the financial services industry are really booming every day. Many new are coming up, and many new are looking at you for solutions as well. But we have issues. Some of them, Vitalik mentioned this morning, from legal, regulatory, privacy, that we are still having trouble with in order to be able to fully deploy them inside financial institutions. But also, let's take a use case, KYC, very simple problem. And it's one of the biggest problems in the banking world today. It's very costly, the rules are there, and it's actually one of the very big frustration points for clients. You know, blockchain, there's no doubt about it, will solve the problem. We're all aware of it, the nature of it, and how we can use the technology. There's no doubt, I think, for all of you, that how we can solve the KYC problem. But we try it. Think about KYC utility, one of the most simple ideas. Me, if I'm going to open 10 bank accounts, why can't I simply go with one utility who's going to do it with all? I get my KYC once, and then all the banks can easily tap into that information. Sounds pretty simple, but I can tell you it's been extremely difficult. We tried governance, I tried it, the private sector has tried it, the industry has tried it, and there's been even private companies trying it. Governments, Singapore has launched an initiative, India has tried one as well, where we're trying to push the utility model forward. Private companies, there's been numerous of the large companies, tech firms trying to do this as well. But again, a lot of banks are having a bit of issues putting all their client-sensitive information with a private corporation. Industry, which we're trying to drive right now in the region. A lot of banks came together and said, okay, why can't we actually work together and make this happen? A great example is what happened in South Africa. A couple of the banks came together and actually tried to do a utility model. Or private companies. There's many of them, we actually do it as well. We actually try to promote and have an outsourced solution for KYC. But the difficulties are actually quite big. One of them, let's say you're a bank in Hong Kong or a bank in Singapore. The average bank is dealing with about 12 to 15 different regulators in the region. It's very difficult that each different regulator will have a different set of requirements. How can you build a utility that can comply with each one of them? The lack of standardization. Even the same jurisdiction. I can tell you if you're talking about Hong Kong, let's say the big 80 banks that are based there, each one of them uses different standards to how they onboard a client. So even if we would put this on the blockchain, what actually standards will be used for people to submit what they need to submit? Lack of government support. In many countries, the government does not want to take this charge on board, leaving this to the private institutions. And then there's the regular issues that we're familiar with, from data confidentiality to more blockchain-related issues that we have. But actually, there's been actually positive momentum. We've seen over the last year a lot of regulators trying to push and attack this issue, not only in Asia, but also globally. We had some on the sandboxes. The number of sandboxes that are being presented right now, a lot of the use cases that are being used in those sandboxes by regulators are related to KYC and onboarding. But actually, the real big problem we can try to solve, and that will actually be the big point of this, is really the issue of actually consortiums, a lot of the consortiums we are seeing. The financial institutions coming together to actually work together to try to come up with standards that we can actually use. But the big issue we're trying to solve at the underlying basis, the difficulty we have is always digital identity. As much as we try to push new blockchain solutions or actually KYC utilities, at the end, the most fundamental level, if we're not able to solve the digital identity issue, it's going to be very difficult. But again, there's a lot of improvements taking place. And this is why I'm extremely optimistic. If we look at how actually today we have all this paper documentation and how we're able to now to move in what we know a 2.0 version to actually be able to use that. A digital identity, the three main elements. How can you prove you are who you are? How can you continuously prove you are who you are? And how can others actually come and check that it's actually you and actually be able to access your information? And this is an area where there's a lot of work being done right now globally, and where I'm extremely bullish, where over the next coming years, hopefully we'll have able to make some improvements. You know, from the attributes that we're having, we're able to integrate in, and actually be able to make sure to determine who is the person, to some of the authentication tools that we have. And this is actually an area where we're getting a lot of inspiration with what's happening in China here as well. Not only with blockchain-based solutions, from all the way from biometrics to face recognition and many other solutions. Apple's new iPhone 10 is a great example of that. And last point is also how you're able to access that information, how banks and financial institutions are able to access that information. And here we're experimenting with many ways are taking place. This is the example from the World Economic Forum, where there's a lot of initiatives going on right now on how to try to solve this issue. So when I was saying at the beginning that I'm extremely bullish, that this is one of the most exciting times when you're looking at it from a regulatory perspective, because there's also a lot of countries looking at it right now as well. We have numerous digital identity use cases and initiatives that have been going on as well for some time. So hopefully I was able to convince you, next time you hear about regulations and you hear about law and compliance, that actually this is actually one of the biggest opportunities we have right now. Not only to solve the issue inside the financial services system, but also the many others who can benefit from it. From those who are currently financially excluded, the 2 billion people we have in the world, to the everyday consumers of financial services. And this is why I believe we're currently going through one of the most exciting periods when it comes to anybody looking at the regulatory, legal, or broader compliance fields. So thank you very much. That's all my time, and thank you very much for your time.